Nietzsche in history. We often hear the dictum paraded around with some smugness. It goes something like this: those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. And yet today we live in an era where there is more history than there ever has been in the history of human history. More and more historical information, more and more historical artifacts, more and more history per se. Historical knowledge, historical investigations, historical theories, historical hypotheses are resplendent. And yet, we still repeat our history. Even when we know it, it still becomes repeated. So the dictum must be wrong. People who know their history seem doomed to repeat it. Perhaps this has something to do with Nietzsche's more general theory of the eternal return. Perhaps part of the human condition is the tendency to repeat things endlessly, even to our own detriment, no matter how much history we may know. But then again, if we take Nietzsche's position on the second of the Thoughts Out of Season essays, those earlier essays of Nietzsche, the second one being on the use and abuse of history, we might find that this surfeit of history, this surfeit of history, is itself the reason for the repetition of mistakes. Why? Because this excess of history, of historical knowledge, of historical perspective, this tendency to look back, crab-like, as Nietzsche liked to say, this so weakens the will that the modern historical man is unable to stop himself from making those same mistakes. He has been weakened by history itself. Nietzsche himself said that his own contemporaries had too much history, too much historical knowledge. They looked back too much. They thought about history too much, to such an extent that they forgot the present. They were, to him, like actors in historical garb, wearing the costumes of one century and another, all higgledy-piggledy and mismatched. Inside they were a jumble of different historical notions, different values. A complexity of values which fought against each other, values which could not conform to each other, but rather raged against each other within one man, within one culture, within one nation. Historical knowledge paralyzing the culture, paralyzing people within the culture. No wonder there's no great leaders. No wonder. There's no great works of art, because everybody in the modern world is paralyzed by the weight of a complexity and self-contradictory history. And this tendency from Nietzsche's time has just continued. And it has become even more absurd. We all know about woke histories and all the rest, and parallel histories and wishful thinking histories, the histories of victors and the histories of losers, and the histories of abusers and confusers. Far too much history weighing everybody down. No one can take decisive action. No one can even think, let alone lead and command. And even those who should obey are merely befuddled by the myriad of choices in front of them as they take on one historical garb after another. So what did Nietzsche recommend? Well, clearly, he did not recommend this. He did not recommend the state of things as they were in his own era, and he surely would not recommend what we have today, a grotesquerie of historical overabundance. And it's easy to see that the great cultures of Nietzsche's estimation, the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans and the men of the Italian Renaissance, it's easy to see that these men, these cultures, had very little history. The Greeks' history was somewhat singular. It served their chauvinism. For surely the ancient Greeks were nothing if not chauvinistically single-minded about their own history. And it is that focused single-mindedness of having one's own history and being rooted and certain in that history that allows one to do great things, create great art, and to lead, and to strive, and to struggle. That kind of history is a healthy one. Of course, modernists would say, oh, that's terrible, they were prejudiced people. They didn't know about the complementary cultures, and they didn't know about how this culture and that culture are equally valuable. They didn't know about cultural enrichment, about knowing about all the different cultures of the world. No, these Greeks, they knew one culture, their own, and they thought it was the best. And they made it the best, and they excelled. Similarly, the Romans, although of course the Roman Empire fell as it became more and more multicultural and more multi-historical. And so the men of the Renaissance cleared the decks and looked back to Greece and Rome alone. That gave them their ethos and their strong commanding point. And so it seems to me that we too today should ditch all the multicultural, multi-historical, multifaceted multis of modernity We should have one history, one historical myth, the myth of the 21st century, let it be called, let it be ours, and let it be fashioned in such a way that it takes us towards greatness. That's all the history we need. We do not need to know about any other country outside of our own, any other culture outside of our own. And of course, this is where Christianity poisoned the well very early on, some 2,000 years ago, because the history of the Bible was an alien history, a history that was grafted onto our own and came to displace our own. Therefore, we must only have our own history purified